So, I give the signal to the homicide detective. At that point, the door opens, gunfire erupts. She runs down the hallway. He comes, and before we even exchange gunfire with the subject, he comes to the door and he shoots himself in the head. And I wouldn't eat, and I had people go, man, you got thin, dude. You look great, man. And I was dying on the inside. We lost him. By whatever means necessary, he passed.
Oh, man. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Be Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Alex V, and we're coming to you from RTS Tactical Studios here in Miami, Florida. In today's conversation, we talk to JC Preyeza, someone with over 28 and a half years of law enforcement experiences. We talk about his time in law enforcement and some of the silent struggles that he faced. We take a deep dive into what it's like to be a police officer, dealing with mental health issues, with struggles that no one else knows about. After retirement, JC took time to really empower those that are currently in the line of duty, to let them know that they need to share their story. So thank you for joining today, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
It's a great honor for me to have you here. And
thank you.
We had a very lengthy conversation before we started. The interesting thing about it is sometimes people only have like one or two stories. When we had that conversation, I'm like, there's a lot of stories that I'm going to be able to get out of JC and we're going to be able to enjoy for our audience.
Yeah.
The most basic question, because I am a civilian, why did you get into police work?
It's funny, if you word it a different way, like why did you get into police work, that's one way, but I think police work came after me.
Okay.
And the funny thing about that is that, I've said the story before where, I played high school football and I was a frustrated football player. I had some letters of interest from colleges or whatever, but it didn't pan out. I had injuries and I wasn't that great, to be honest with you. So Miami-Dade Police had what was called the Pig Bowl, where they had a football team and we would travel to LAPD and play against them and go to New York and play NYPD. And I said, man, what a great thing to do police work. Miami Vice was out. Not that I thought I was going to get a Ferrari because to this day, I never got a Ferrari. That's not a thing, But I said, hey man, nice clothes and a big gun on my ankle. But no, I've always liked to serve and to help. And I figured, hey man, if I can play football and travel, that's the closest to pro football.
I have to ask, what position did you play?
Offensive line.
Okay, yeah. I could see that.
So, I joined the department. My older brother was already an officer, so he was living the good life and involved in a lot of stuff, and I thought it was interesting, and I moved towards that. And as I went through my career, I figured out that police work is not a job you apply for. That's a calling. It's 100%. There were people in the academy that quickly dropped out. It wasn't for them. There were people that even made it to actual sworn status and things did not pan out. The job of first responder, and I say it across the board, for me it's law enforcement, but other firefighters, we always talk and it's a calling. And you have to answer the call and you'll know that once you go through that career.
So this calling of yours, right, I can see how that's it, right? Because like you said, Miami Vice was out, right? And maybe a lot of people signed up. And then when shit got real, things got real, all of a sudden it's like, that's not for me, right?
Yeah, it's not what I thought it was going to be. It's extremely stressful. It is not pull your gun, shoot a couple rounds, go have a hot dog. It's not. It's different. It's real. It's real.
So I'm picturing, right? You're going into police work. You're coming off of training, right? At the academy.
Correct.
You're this, I'm only saying this because we had this conversation before, right?
Right.
This big, strong man, right? You're ready to take on the world. You're confident, right? You mentioned to me this story right after police academy, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of want to go into that story, right? Yeah. So the time frame was what, 3 months post academy?
3 months, no, 3 months right out of the academy, you have what's called writing assignment. They do one shift on days, one shift, and it's a month long each shift. One shift on afternoons and one on midnights. And then after that, you're on probation for a year. But in that year, after those 3 months, you're cut on your own. You're cut loose. Mm-hmm. And you ride by yourself and you go on calls and you're evaluated on your performance.
Okay, so you once you were cut, right?
Yeah.
This is the story that we got into, right? So
yeah.
You're cut, you're ready to go. You've done all your training. You've done all these scenarios. You know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
You received the call, right?
Yeah, I received remember it was a Sunday night and I received a call from assisting a homicide detective, a very senior sergeant and detective from homicide, right? So, a rookie, wet behind the ears, right out of the academy. I was like, wow, very excited. So when I get there, they brief me on a call where there was a homicide subject inside of a hotel room at a very popular location down here on Southwest 8th Street. And I remember we had the big brick cell phones, and we didn't have all this technology we have now. So, I remember the detective telling me, look, the guy that killed the girl, it's all over the news. It was a flight attendant. He's going to be in room number 12, and we're going to call him, and he's going to come out with his hands up. And I'm right out of the academy. I'm like, it's not going to go that way. No, because you're at your heightened level of your training, your officer safety. For 9 months, you've had training videos. If you don't do these right things, this guy got killed and this guy got shot, and surviving confrontations. And so you come out and you're at the very top level of your officer survival skills, and everything's very fresh. And I said to myself, no. And sure enough, they called from a farther distance. I'm by the door where the quote unquote, homicide subject is, and they're calling from a distance. And, I was 21 years old, and I'm like, something here doesn't strike me right. And sure enough, things went south very quickly.
They were from the distance, and we were talking about like the X-ray guy, right?
Yeah.
The X-ray guy's like, no, you're safe. Don't worry.
Safe,
but I'm gonna hide behind this.
He's got three eyes and he's glowing green, and everything's fine. You're like, I don't think so. Yeah, but
so you said not everything went smoothly.
yeah. So from there, what happened was it was a flight attendant that this individual had met. Apparently, he was known as a ladies' man, and he would go to the airport and pick up women, and then go have a good time with them or whatever, wine them and dine them. So apparently, this individual picked up a flight attendant who was on a stopover, right, coming back from Dominican Republic to LA, if I'm not mistaken. And so one thing led to another, and they ended up in a hotel room in Miami Springs, which is a small municipal city here in Miami. And one thing led to another, and she was murdered. And he hid her body under a box spring. A week later, the body had been obviously decomposing, so they find the body. But getting back to this, the informant was the quote-unquote girlfriend of the subject, called the tip line and said, hey, look, he gave me all the details matched, and so we knew that we were very confident that this was a subject. And so the detective made the phone call, and like I said, I'm right next to the door, and I can hear now this guy realizes that his girlfriend, the informant, has turned him in because nobody else would know this. And so he begins to beat her up, and there's some tussling inside and breaking things. And so, I give the signal to the homicide detective. At that point, the door opens, gunfire erupts. She runs down the hallway. He comes, and before we even exchange gunfire with the subject, he comes to the door and he shoots himself in the head. And prior to that, I can hear the whizzing of bullets because he was originally shooting out the window and towards us. And that was the first time in my career where there was no BS, there was no macho, it got real. It got real, and the whizzing of bullets, when you've heard them, it's not fun. And I remember that it was the first time that I felt fear. And, as we go through our conversation, one of the things that you typically don't hear in law enforcement is the talking of fear. And when you hear officers tell you, oh, I'm never scared or whatever like that, BS.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you that fear is your friend. Fear, when used properly, will make sure you're not reckless and that you protect yourself the right way. Courage is having fear and still moving forward.
I was going to say, that's like the definition of being brave.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
To have fear, but to continue.
Yeah, still, I caught many homicide subjects in my career when I was in K-9, and a lot of really evil, bad people. And then there's a distinction, people that make mistakes and evil, and there's no mistake when you see them. But there was fear constantly in my life, and I had to move forward.
I want to pivot there because you talked about your career in K-9, right? Again, I have to ask you, how did you get into K-9? So you went through this. I mean, obviously, having this very shockful experience, right, with it 3 months being cut loose,
Yeah.
right? Fast forward, how long after that did you go into the K-9 unit?
3 years.
Those 3 years later?
3 years, and that's a very junior move, meaning normally you're not even considered for K-9 many years later in your career.
That's
because you
something
need,
that's usually
yeah, you need more experience or whatever. But I did have dogs before getting on the department. I was involved in doing like sporting events with dogs and bike work and tracking stuff and whatever. So I had a little bit of knowledge when I did go apply for the position. And so, I didn't make it the first time, but the second time I interviewed, they gave me an opportunity. And there's a good and there's a bad about K-9. It's a great job. The bad thing is, once you do that, you don't want to do anything else.
Oh, really?
Because like I tell people, you have very wealthy people in this world that pay, $50,000 to go hunt, mule deer in Kenya and, whatever. And it's a very lucrative sport and stuff for rich and famous. And I got to hunt people that wanted to hunt me. And once you taste that and you like it, there's nothing else you're going to be able to do. There's actually a Hemingway quote that says that. Once you've hunted armed men and liked it, there's nothing else that you can do.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a great job. If you truly like it, and I found myself all in this profession. I found that even being in scenarios where, oh my God, I excelled at it and I liked it and it attracted me. And not for 1 second did I ever allow my fear to stop me from doing stuff. And so my career excelled and I enjoyed very much hunting people.
So so I'm trying to follow this timeline here, right? So you're cut loose, right? You have this traumatic experience. Then you're going 3 years later into K-9, right? And at the time, the RID unit was actually developed here in Miami, right?
Yeah, but let me stop you. The RID, what I was talking about, the RID back when it first started was not a unit, an entity in its own.
Okay.
It wasn't. They got officers from different districts and they created the RID unit at the very first thing because Mayor Pinellas at the time, we had some high profile tourists that were killed and it was affecting tourism and Dade County wasn't safe and, the Miami Vice and the Cocaine Cowboys. And that was also the same time that Mayor Pinellas switched Metro Dade to Miami-Dade because for money purposes, nobody knew in the country where Metro Dade what they were talking about. So they switched it, and I understand totally.
Some branding.
Right, yeah. They changed up the whole logo stuff and it was Miami-Dade. So at that point, RID was basically more, they would just pick officers from different places and you can come and do it. And if I remember correctly, some of it may have been on overtime because our tourism industry was taking a huge hit. High profile murders in Europe reporting, don't go to Miami, you're going to get killed. And,
right.
And so that was also when our rental car agencies, the numbers on the tags started with Z and N.
Oh, so they were easily
and the bad guys knew that. So that changed because of that also. They would get up on State Road 112, throw rocks or put stuff in the way. People would get out of their car to check the status of their vehicle and get robbed, and that led to other things. So yeah, RID wasn't like now that you're assigned to RID.
Correct.
We did RID details and I'm working RID this weekend or whatever. So that's when we started, but it was extremely fun. It was extremely dangerous. And it was just something that was different. Then later on, they created RIDE and RID. RID was, Robbery Intervention Detail Enhanced. And so they had their own command staff and supervisors, and they did more top-notch surveillance, and they had technology, and so it advanced much more based on the needs that we needed,
It's fascinating, man.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you were able to kind of live through all these different sectors. And in Miami, like at the time, we see Miami now and it's like this huge thriving city, right?
Yeah.
And we've had the huge influx, let's say, since COVID. All these people come here from New York, from Los Angeles, but at the time, like Miami was considered like the little brother of the U.S., right?
Right.
It was kind of like, yeah, Miami.
Yeah.
I remember the joke was, oh, you're going down to Miami you guys are squeezing oranges.
Right.
Right. That was like the joke, right? It was in The Devil's Advocate, that movie. I'll never forget that. And Miami was kind of growing, and it was in that like awkward teenager phase, right? But there was a lot of like real crime in Miami. There was a lot of
It was the real deal. We've always been the major hub of things that come in and out of this country from South and Central America. We had the Mario boat lift. Obviously, that was when I was a lot younger, but there were still remnants of things coming through. Then we had people that had come in Mario that were getting out of prison here from serving sentences, and so we were dealing with that. And I came across people that were just downright scary, and these were people that were in prisons in Cuba and then did prison time here, and they didn't care about nothing.
And there were people from insane asylums as well that were sent from Cuba as well. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
That's it's funny because you're Cuban, right?
Well, born here, but yeah,
But
of Cuban descent. Right?
And I'm half Cuban, and you kind of hear about the change that happened in Miami through that time, right? Because Miami Beach especially was just older people, right? It was just older white people, right? And then all of a sudden you have this huge influx of let's call them first generation Cubans,
right,
that were leaving for an opportunity to build, right? And things kind of started moving in a building direction, right? And then you start getting all these like, for lack of a better term, vessels and pockets of people like the Mariel, where you start getting a lot of people that were emptied out from prisons. You started getting a lot of people that came from insane asylums, right? Then you started getting different generations after that of Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, and Miami started becoming this huge melting pot, which it wasn't before.
Right.
And it takes time to acclimate, right?
Yeah, you had a mixture of, there were a lot of people in the dope business that went legit, either because of calling to their heart or they, their partners were all getting arrested. But there was a significant amount of dopers left over that didn't get caught that started to launder money. So you had a mixture of laundering money with people that were good, fashion, old school people that just wanted to build and make a life for them. And I think that the perfect mix, I'm not saying go launder money, but the perfect mix of people that wanted to build and people that wanted to wash money, and it kind of produced, and Miami blew up.
It did.
In the industries and real estate and building and manufacturing, Miami blew up. And overnight, it became a much larger city.
And you were kind of living the policing during that time, right?
Yeah, I dealt with some remnants of leftover doper days.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my first hydroponics lab, which was funny because I went to school with a guy. When we picked him up, I'm like, hey.
No way, really?
Yeah, he's like, JC. I'm like, hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey.
And he was the first grow house. And I remember that I got dispatched to to a house that, it was an apartment actually in Fontainebleau. And there was water. The person downstairs says, hey, there's water coming from the upstairs thing. And the first thing I thought about, somebody died in the bathtub and the water stayed on.
Right.
And lo and behold, we went in and I remember there was almost 300 trees in a 3 or 4 bedroom condo. And it was the first time I saw it and I was like, wow. And I go, whoever did this, just technology wise and the way that they built it, if you've ever been in a hydroponics lab, they're amazing.
Yeah.
Irrigation system and the lighting and the fertilizing.
Power, yeah.
Wow, you're wasting away at doing this stuff.
Right.
And
it's a lot of engineering, right?
Oh,
it's
my God,
lot
it's
of
a lot of engineering, a lot of time and process. And what happened, one of the tubes had gotten clogged, right? Because there's no dirt, I guess, with the little lava rocks or whatever, and had gotten clogged. And so that's what happened. But other than that, he would have had a great harvest and gone on and made money.
Wow.
But yeah.
Wow. So I want to go back to a little bit about, and this kind of segues, you talked about a really traumatic moment in your life, right? About when, there's been a few, but the one you touched on was, you were fresh to the force, right? You were seeing something that the homicide detective was like, we got this, the guy's gonna come out, it's good to go. And you had this massive traumatic experience, right? And what's interesting is you mentioned to me earlier outside of the show, like you just carried on, right? It's like another day. And I'm sure that's a common theme within law enforcement, right? Yeah. It's like, it happened, it's okay, you carry on. And then, you're having coffee with the boys back at the station and it's just another day.
Yeah.
But from that, when did you start seeing those things like manifesting? Because I know you've had a lot of these experiences. Like, when was it like, wow, like this?
So what I would tell our viewers is we study throughout our school, we study in the academy, we study in college. We have a lot of real estate people, they study all their stuff, whatever. When have you stopped and taken the time to study yourself? And we take things for granted, right?
Yes, sir.
So that incident that happened, at no point did I get back in my police car that night and go, oh my God, this guy just killed himself or whatever. I didn't. I went up all my life. I shared a cool story and moved on. But recently, through the movement that I've gotten into in post-traumatic and addictions and all this stuff for mental health for first responders, and analyzing myself, there were a tremendous amount of red flags. We may write them off as one thing, but they're not. And I'll give you an example. I was 21 years old. I was in shape. All my partners were 19, 20, 21, you know. We didn't have kids. We didn't have wives. So we used to go clubbing, and that was a hot scene here in Miami Beach. And so we would go, and we would just completely drink to the point of losing control many, many times. Not every time, but many times. And looking back at that, those are all red flags, right?
So you're saying that was like the outlet, right?
Yeah, that was the outlet. Looking back at that time,
right. That's not what you saw.
I'm 21 and I'm having a blast. I'm living at my parents' house. I have a sports car that I just bought. I'm making money. I have no expenses. And so, you know, we would go out and drink. And looking back now, those were the beginning of red flags when it comes to first responders and drinking. And I wasn't the only one. And I tended to drink more than everybody else at that time. And since then, I still have, you know, mutual friends, and a lot of us have gone through the same type of stuff. But you don't realize it at that time. And again, you didn't go to the club and say, oh my God, I just drank so much because of that guy or because of this scenario, right? So looking back, you realize that. So if you're doing something like that, like I tell people, if you wake up and you have to have a drink, or I have people that, you know, friends of mine that like to do cannabis or whatever, if you have to have it, there's probably a problem either in the works or directly in front of you and you haven't even seen it.
There's an underlying reason for
Absolutely, 100%.
And okay, so you mentioned that you came across that point. How did you come to that conclusion, though?
Well, I went on, you know, quote unquote, living my life as a young man, and you know, I got together with my wife, who, you know, we've known each other since we were very young, and I got my house, and I got married, and life went on. And again, at no point, and I had many, you know, quote unquote, learning scenarios on calls, extremely traumatic, that I still remember to this day. And again, at no point did I ever get to, wow, like that really affected me. Like I always thought, okay, I'm remembering them. You know, it's just, I remembered it. Yeah, it was horrific. I remembered it. You know, shootings, the smells of scenes. I remember I went to a call where it was two men who were lovers, and one had killed the other one, and then he killed himself. But in that process, they shot a sliding glass door. And so as we're checking the house, very, very quiet, every few seconds, one little bead of glass would fall. And I still can hear that. And so these are things that now I know, having gone through post-traumatic treatment and therapy and things, that you're reliving that. Those are flashbacks. Those are triggers that when we smell and hear and that, it takes us back, you know? So you have to be careful of those things.
And can we dive a little bit deeper into that? Because I know there's been a lot, and we've talked about some of these stories, and I can see how that sound of that one glass hitting every couple seconds, like can be brought back, and you can relive the moment, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes reimagine it.
Yeah.
Right? Have there been other moments that like really have been like, this is something that I relived, this is something that I reimagined, and it happens very frequently?
There are a lot of calls, and again, there are a lot of calls that I remember. There are a lot of calls that were not pleasant, but none of them had the reaction to the call we'll get into eventually with the girl and the link. And it's very important, and I keep pressing the fact that trauma is one thing, and we get large volumes of trauma, sometimes more than others, depending on your assignment. But when that trauma is linked to you, and it could be, I've dealt with a firefighter in the past that, you know, several kids had died in a very famous fire down here, and everything was fine, even though there was horrible and tragedy and all kinds of stuff going around, but till he saw a teddy bear that his daughter had. Things didn't really, now the tragedy became his. So when there's a link, the trauma just got a lot more dangerous for that individual.
It becomes personal, right?
It becomes absolutely personal, and now you are part of that trauma. You know, there's a link there. And again, we see miserable stuff and it's horrible. Yeah, you could drink and I don't want to remember that, and the poor kid and the poor lady and the poor man. But when you get and you go, oh my God, that's little Debbie's bear, or that's little Johnny's car, is when there is some sort of a mechanism that really can put you in a bad place instantly.
It kind of pulls empathy into it, right?
Empathy, and there's just, I think we're just scratching the surface. I really do. When we went through all these wars, Desert Storm and Afghanistan and all that, you know, and we're losing way too many military men and women every day. I think that now as first responders, we're starting to see our suicides are through the roof, especially this year. We just lost a firefighter here the other day on Friday, just 3 days ago. And that was triggered from what I'm being told by an incident with a child. Undoubtedly, his cup was full. Like my therapist always told me, you have a Rolodex in your subconscious. And you get to a call and there's trauma and you get a Rolodex and you file it. Dead baby, you file it. Your partner gets murdered, you file it. And one day you go file, there's no more room. That is your trigger day. And it could be anything. It could be even like, wow, really? That call? That's not a big deal. Well, all the other calls that he had were a big deal, and now today that's a big deal for him or for her.
Well, like the saying goes, the straw that broke the camel's
That's
back,
it.
right?
That's
It's not
absolutely.
a straw that hurt the camel. It's just the present weight. And that was just the
That's
break.
it. That's it. Yeah.
And so what do you think is causing, I mean, you know, it's a very complicated question, right? But in your experience, why do you think that this year stands out from the previous ones? You had mentioned that there's a big rise this year. Is it overall sentiment? Is it the issue of processing these things? Is it the volume at which it's coming in? What's you know, I get it. This is a very large question to ask, but if you'd like to dive in a little bit.
Look, I wish that we could find one thing, and I don't think there is. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of smoke and mirrors going on in our world. It's not even our country anymore. In our world, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of lies. There's a lot of technology with our phones. There is a lot of mental illness, and some of those things can cause that. There's a lot of medications. There's just a lot of things that are going on. As a society, we become desensitized. You know, 20 or 30 years ago, if we saw a dead child on the news, I mean, nobody would, you know, now it's a common thing, and there's just a lot going on. But I will tell you, in the profession of first responder and military, the number one thing that we're lacking is leadership and caring, but caring for real. And the fact that, you know, when I speak to officers and I cry on video and I hug them, they realize this guy's for real.
It's genuine.
I don't make any money. I'm not here to meet people. I'm here to help people. I was in a very, very dark place. I had gotten to the point that I was thinking and contemplating suicide. I have overdosed. Was an alcoholic. I went through all these things. So what kind of a backup am I going to be to you if I don't look at that field out there and tell you, look at all the mines that are in that field. Look at the pitfalls and the quicksand. And I can't do that. And we'll get to exactly how I started my platform, because it was just this past year, there was an incident that, an event I should say, that really pushed me over the edge to do this.
So I want to touch back on one more point, because I like how you set up the conversation to get further into it, right? Yeah. And get people captivated. But I really want to talk about, you mentioned that there was a moment with a girl that linked to you, to yourself, right? I would like to first talk about what it was that you felt, right? Like what it was that linked you to it, how you discovered it, and what the incident with the girl was, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. So look, this is important for people to understand, you know, the people that are listening, because again, hypothetical, you go to a call. Let's not go hypothetical. Let's go, you know, right into the call. So I had just taken my promotional exam, and my sergeant allowed me to run the squad. And I get a call from a public service aide Says, look, I'm here to do a report. The car is missing. So we're in a condominium, mother and father, and they're like, hey, my car is missing. I go, what do you mean it's missing? Yeah, the car's missing. I go, well, go get the keys. They go and look for the keys. The keys aren't here. Who else is in the house? Oh, my daughter's in the room. Go get your daughter. They come back and she wrote this letter. And in our profession, when you get a person that writes a letter, 10 out of 10 times it's the real deal. So I read the letter and I remember vividly, I will be by the water next to the trees or whatever. So back then we didn't have the technology to, trigger fish cell phones and triangulate signals. You had to bolo it, be on the lookout, and helicopters and all kinds of stuff, and look for the car and give the information on the radio and look for the car. We skipped absolutely nothing. We did flyers, missing person, the whole 9 yards. That day we went home, right? And that girl had been arrested that morning for shoplifting. So she had been told, go to your room. We don't want to, who knows what they told her. She wrote that letter, took the keys, and she drove her parents' car into a canal and killed herself at the age of 16. So we go home that night, nobody finds her. The next morning, I have a message from a girlfriend that says, hey, I found her cell phone. And in the back of the apartment complex, there's a canal and a little street, and she had placed her cell phone on a phone pole directly in front of the canal. So when I turn in the canal, I already see the marks of the car on the grass. So I leave the girl in the police car, and I look crystal clear, I can see the car. And I remember the diver coming up saying single white female lying prone in the back of the car. I remember we towed up the car, we removed her body, we took off her clothes with a medical examiner, we inventoried her body, and I saw her face. She was a beautiful girl, had dark curly hair. And so after that day, I went home and I said to myself, what a tragedy, right? Again, at no point did I say, oh, wow, oh my God, I'm losing my mind, I'm going crazy. I just, wow, how sad, 16-year-old girl losing her life like that. And I went on and lived my life, except that this was different. And the difference was every time I would drive by that complex, I would see her face smiling at me. And to people that haven't been in a post-traumatic event, that sounds crazy, and imagine you seeing it. So you kind of feel crazy and you don't tell anybody. That went on, Alex, for 10 years. And again, not knowing, never been warned, nobody addressing that, which was an issue. And it's an issue we're trying to stop. 10 years later, I remember my wife and I being in the pool, and I can audibly hear my wife, and I'm just like staring out into space, and I can hear Earth to JC, Earth to JC. And I go, what? And I turn to her and she goes, where were you? She had been calling me and I could hear her, but I couldn't react because I was engaged with the face of this girl that took her life. Through different workings or whatever, I end up going to a post-traumatic stress retreat, post-traumatic stress disorder retreat at that time in Tampa with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue and some Marines that were friends of mine. And we went up there, and again, they told me when I was up there, out of your whole career at that time, pick 2 things that bother you or that you want to address. And look how crazy the mind is, that with all the gruesome things that I had seen and been involved in, I picked the scenario of the girl and another girl that died in a car crash. But that girl was more ingrained in my mind. So I just picked those scenarios, and that week we worked on those scenarios. At the end of the week, that Thursday, we did what's called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a very well-known technique for post-traumatic healing, right?
What's the process of that?
There's two. I've done both. One worked more than the other for me. There's movement with the therapist does, and you focus on the movement. Mine was audible sounds, and the crazy thing is, you have like what would have been a little Walkman or a little phone, and all it has is an on and off and the volume, and it has a little tiny earphone, and you put it on. And the therapist is in front of me. It's not hypnosis. You're completely awake. The therapist tells me, what do you hear? And the audible sound started boom, 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 boom. And so I tell her, no, it's just boom, boom, boom. And then she goes, okay, so take me back to that call. I'm pulling up at the apartment, whatever. And all of a sudden, the audible sound goes boom, 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 bum, 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 boom, 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 bum, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da. And it's changing. And I'm telling her, oh, yeah, you're changing the sound. She goes, I'm not changing anything.
So it's the sound was in fact staying the same, but
your mind is interpreting now different. And, and again, I'm not a therapist, but what she taught me was that there's a process when you have trauma. And her analogy back then, and I use it all the time now, when you fall off your bike, you skin your knee, there's blood, there's the plasma, there's the collagen, the scabbing, and your skin comes back. And in trauma, we don't get the opportunity as first responders. We got to get there and move and work and do our stuff and move on. And I totally agree with that. But we don't have an opportunity to process. So that trauma gets caught up inside of us. So she tells me, look, you need to get the trauma from here up to here so we can fix it. And so the audible sounds kept changing like crazy. And so she goes, okay, now I want you to, and I went through the entire call, how I left the station, went to the call, saw the dead body, went home. She goes, okay, now I want you to go back and begin your day again. So I went back and I was able to go back and, okay, I'm leaving the station after roll call and I go to the scene. And this is going to sound really crazy, and she's dead. And I was able to talk to the parents and we cried, we mourned. I told them how sad I was for them. And I got in my police car and drove off. Mind you, my entire front shirt was full of tears and snot, to use a not correct term. But so the therapist, she turned off the thing. She goes, she will never bother you again. You were able to mourn her now.
Yeah.
And now I can go to the call, but I have to think about her, and it's different. I don't think about her all the time. I'm talking to you, so I see her face, but she never, ever appeared to me again as a flashback. And the good thing about that is EMDR totally works. The bad thing is, for a lot of painful people, one of my friends who was a Marine, I heard him scream and run down the hallway because it took him back to Fallujah.
I understand.
To that particular scenario that he was working on.
And sometimes the mind protects itself, right? That's why.
Yeah, sometimes it's fight or flight, and fight, flight, and freeze. I like to add, right? And I tell people a lot of times that navigating our trauma is ugly.
It is.
Looking in the mirror is yucky. Yeah. Sometimes we look in the mirror and we don't like what we see. That doesn't change the fact that you still have to look at yourself.
100%.
And
how did that experience connect to your life?
So I grew up in a totally dysfunctional home. And so real quick before I start that, the therapist tells me, so I go, what was it about this call? I've seen decapitated people. I've put my hands in bloody people. I've given compressions. I've been in shootings, all kinds of stuff. And she goes, well, it was a female and she was helpless, and it takes you back to your relationship with your mother. Hello. Talk about deep stuff. I was not into mental health, post-traumatic stuff, and I was like, what are you talking about?
Right. There was a big gap
right.
there.
But I knew that it made sense because that whole week we had spent talking about me and where I came from. But I left the room like, man, am I confused? Man, what are you talking about, right? So to let the viewers know that don't know me, I grew up in a dysfunctional home. I had a seemingly healthy-looking, rambunctious brother at the age of 12 drop dead, right? And I give a lot of talks and talk to men's groups and first responders, and I go, but the key is that my brother died in 1967, and I was born in 1971, and my life was shaped in 1967.
Of course.
Because, my mother, again, perfectly healthy kid, was not expected to die, thankfully was not sick, very healthy, and just dropped dead, basically of a brain aneurysm, right? So when I was born, my mom always told me, you're the greatest gift, and the sun rises and sets with you, and, but you don't realize, I realized now, man, well, that's a lot of pressure for me.
It's a lot of pressure, yeah, absolutely.
That's a lot of pressure. Like, hey, your life is only good when I'm good, right? Anytime I said I had a headache, it was a trauma call.
I can imagine.
Right?
I mean, I can imagine the trauma your parents felt from that experience.
So there is a thing called the Munchausen by proxy, right? Where, there are parents that are constantly telling their kids that there's something wrong or whatever, and you basically force yourself into being sick. I remember I had to go, and she would tell the doctor, oh, he hasn't gone to the bathroom, he hasn't had a bowel movement, and all types of tests and prods and things, and I didn't go to the bathroom because I didn't sit down to go to the bathroom.
There was nothing wrong.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with me, right? But there,
normal.
Yeah, there was a tooth. I went to go get my braces done, and there was a tooth that was back here. Oh, he needs oral surgery. I agree. And, I was put through the ringer in order to, quote unquote, not die or get sick or, And from there, my mom had several bouts of, suicide attempts, but now having been a first responder with many suicides under my belt, I know that when they're going to do it, you're going to do it. End of story. And those are cries for help that my mother was doing. So as a small child, I grew up with coming out of elementary and looking around and not seeing mom's car and standing there with my lunchbox in my bag and waiting for my older sister to pick me up, and then going home and finding letters and empty pill bottles and calling fire rescue. And I think the first time that I thought that I had done CPR on my mom, I must have been 10 or 11 years old. Wow. Things that little kids shouldn't go through. I know now that my entire life was in preparation for this. It's for this.
It was the calling.
It's for the first responders. It's for my brothers and sisters. And I'm not the Messiah, and I'm not, but my whole life I spent, why me? And I have a good friend of mine who's very well known down here that lost his daughter to brain cancer, and he wrote a book, Why Not Me?
Why not?
Right? Stop being the victim. Stop, why me? There's a purpose, obviously. It's not that you're having a shitty life. There's a reason why you go through the things.
And God's molding you, right?
God is completely molding you. So now when I speak to people, you kind of get that look of like, what do you know? And I'm like, ha, ha, ha. Let me tell you. And then that's where our connection. So instead of having a negative connection through trauma, we have a positive connection where I say, I know exactly how you feel and I know exactly what's going through your mind. And those things that, oh, I'm weird, I don't want to say, I've been the weirdo. So let's be weirdos together and let's get this fixed.
Let's be weird.
And
Yeah,
let's
that's
heal.
what's most important, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Let's be weirdos together. Let's heal and move on and live a better life and be better for yourself, number one, and then that'll allow you to be better for the people around you.
So would you say at that moment, thank you for sharing, by the way. Thank you for going
absolutely.
in depth with it. You said there was an issue with that it connected you, right? Because you felt like there was a helpless woman, right? Yeah. Someone that you couldn't help, someone that took her life.
Yeah.
Similar to what you experienced with your mom, was someone that was attempting to, cry for help, as you mentioned. Right. And it kind of brought you back to sitting outside of an elementary school and not knowing if your mom actually had taken her life.
The whole helplessness.
The helplessness.
You're a child. You're a child.
At that moment, or shortly thereafter, is that when you realized that you really wanted to shift your attention to helping other brothers and sisters that had felt something like that? Did it take time after that?
Oh my God.
How did that journey start?
That journey, October 9th will put me, I believe, at 14 years of sobriety, right? When I was going through my drinking, and I got to the point I drank, and And when I say I drank, remember I told you I drank when I would go to clubs and whatever. But when I drank, when I'm saying drink, would be drink every day. There was Monday through Monday, right? With a purpose of what I call the slow bullet. Some people try to kill themselves with a firearm, and I was killing myself any other way that I could, slowly, right? So I would drink, and I would drink for 3 years. The last year, I would drink till I blacked out, okay?
On a daily basis?
On a daily basis. There might have been one day here and there where I just drank so much, because I was up to like 3 liters most of the time.
To kind of recap, you were mentioning that you were drinking 3 liters a night?
Yeah. So I got up to drinking 3 liters a night, completely blacking out, not knowing what I was doing or saying or calling, or which is extremely embarrassing, and it's shameful. And that's how addictions are. They're vicious. It's a cycle. So let me take you through that cycle. So, okay, you're done drinking. You wake up in the morning, and your head feels like a beach ball. And you swear to yourself from the minute you wake up, this will never happen again. Every day, my routine was get in the shower. I would lean on the tiles and let the water run and say, man, you are so stupid. And again, this is all from the enemy. This is the lies that the devil portrays.
You have that deep shame about it too, right?
Deep shame.
Deep shame.
You know, I have a gun on my hip. I tell people what to do. At that point, I was a sergeant for many years. There's nothing I can't handle. I have dealt the worst, helicopter crashes, plane crash, whatever. There's nothing I can't handle, but I couldn't stop from doing this, right? And you're like, man, why? So I'm not doing this ever again. Okay, get dressed, go to work. At that point, I was a shift commander for the county. I was talking to the mayor, the director, usually on a daily basis, briefing the staff duty officers, whatever. Never drank at work, never disrespected the badge or the profession. So I would go in at 2 o'clock. I'm never drinking again. Man, I should have done this from the get-go. Every day, about 5 o'clock.
It's that time.
I'm looking at the clock. I get off at 10. I think this liquor store closes at this time, you know, and then you start to like lose who you really are. Around 7 o'clock, you get off at 10, 3 more hours. I can't wait now. The person that was full of shame before no longer exists. The addict is at the forefront. Get out at 10 o'clock and go. And I became so functional. And people think that when you're an addict, you're falling over, you got 3 heads and a horn. And no, you're functional. And to this day, I have people go, I had no idea.
Well, that's the thing, right? The shame is so deep that you have to kind of hide that side of it.
Yeah,
right?
but you become functional,
right.
You know? I would tell people, you know, the bottle is my girlfriend. She's my side chick. And she never says no to me, and she makes me feel like you can never make me feel. Okay? So there's no competition. And I would protect her like gold because she was important to me. And I wouldn't eat, and I had people go, man, you got thin, dude. You look great, man. And I was dying on the inside.
Your calories were the bottle, basically.
I had no calories because I didn't want any food to interrupt la nota, right? I wanted to feel the whole intoxication. I wanted to forget my entire life every single night, right? So I would go to, if I went to this liquor store yesterday, I went to this one today, and I would buy a steak, some chips, some olives, lettuce, whatever, so I didn't look like the drunk, right? You looked at what I was buying, you go, hey, this guy's having a slamming party tonight. You know, 3 bottles of wine and a steak, a T-bone, a ribeye, whatever, and some chips, you know. And that was every night. I would go to different locations just to get my fix. The next morning, I'm never doing this again. Yep, should have done this. Vicious cycle the entire time. And people don't realize that, you know, somewhere in the middle there, you get in a car and you drive. You kill somebody. You kill yourself. There's a lot. There's a lot. Spiritual warfare is 100% real.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. If you believe in white chocolate, there's milk chocolate.
Yeah.
Good and bad. And it's real. It's real.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to touch on some stuff here. So you had this moment in your life where you're drinking an excessive amount of alcohol, right? Where there was two of you, in essence, right? There was JC that was the responsible, hardworking, holding the line man, right? And then there's the man that's struggling, that's in pain, that has lost control, right? So there's two splits in your life, right? And you live these things. And how did that come to be the one JC where we have today? What was the first step in healing?
So I like to say we all wear different masks, right? So the unique thing about first responders, and again, it could be firefighter, police, whatever, is I go to work and I may have to be the executioner today and neutralize a threat. Many times I went to domestics and I had to counsel people. Many times I had to talk to teenagers that were in a bad place in their life and mentor. Many times I went to people that had just had loss and were grieving, and I had to be clergy. So, I was a father, I was a husband, I was a sibling, and then I had this dark side of me that a lot of people have and they don't know, but I had a very dark side of me that I hid away from everybody. Nobody knew what I was going through. Complete dysfunction. And I was just hurting me for all the quote unquote bad things and all the bad stuff that I had done and the bad person that I was. And those are all lies that you're fed by the enemy. So moving on through this vicious cycle, like I was telling you, you get to a point like I did, where you wake up and you go, listen, I have done this for X amount of time, and this is not working. And I was getting worse and blacking out more. I didn't know what I had been doing the night before. And, one day I knelt down and I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And I was pretty much already going down the road of taking my own life. Because what happens is you argue with your significant other, or you don't do a certain task, you're a failure in your eyes because of the vicious cycle of shame. And so you're like, you know what? I'm going to get the hell out of here. I'm going to take my own life because I'm a burden. I have become, the ball and chain that weighs people down and takes people under, and the world will be a better place without me. And when you talk to therapists, they tell you suicide is a problem solving. In the eyes of a suicidal person, is problem solving. People get cancer and they're terminal, or they're going to go through a bad bout of therapy or treatment. You know what? I'm just going to commit suicide. And that's an answer. There's actually documented euphoric responses from people once they decide that they are going to commit suicide, because it's an answer to their problems. And that is the biggest freaking lie that you have ever heard in your life.
It's a big lie.
It is never the right way to go. It's not. And it's not like, oh, it's a selfish thing. I used to be one of those that said that. Oh, that's a selfish act. And they're not doing it out of selfishness. They're doing it because they're actually thinking you're going to be better off without them.
Yeah, their perception is that they're the burden, they're the problem.
Yeah, their perception is I'm a piece of shit, so I'm going to take myself out, and you guys, your life will just prosper. And that's a lie. That's a huge lie. And suicide in our profession is always back here like the little cloud in that commercial. We don't actively put it here and go, okay, I'm going to do it. But it's back here, and it's always wandering back here when you see certain things. And again, when there's that link that personalizes it to you, it's very dangerous.
And in my experience, what I've seen is that the truth is that you can't do it by yourself. You can't overcome addiction by yourself, right? Like you can't heal by yourself, right? There's that saying that men heal men, right? But people heal other people, and we need one another to ask, is everything okay? Everything's fine. No, for real though. Like, is everything okay? Talk to me about your day. Like, what's going on? What's burdening you,
right? The friendship is needed, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because during that time, everybody who's ever worked with me knows, at the station, hey, JC, what's going on, man? Every day above ground's a good day.
Right.
That became my biggest lie.
And that's the default, right?
Yeah, that became my biggest lie because I did not want to be above ground. There was nothing about good in my life at that time. And you get caught in the storm, and I recently wrote in one of my stories for the account to my followers, when you're in addiction and you're in a dark place, I compared it to being a boat with no motor and no rudder out in the ocean.
I'm just floating.
Many times in our life, we navigate through things and we could still see the shoreline and the beach. You're okay. But you're out there and there's no way to get back in. There's no motor, no rudder. The sail's not catching wind and there's no land anywhere in sight. And when you feel lost like that, hey, what's the next best thing? I'm going to just go ahead and commit suicide. And that is a huge lie. There are always people around you that want to help you. There are the people that you think you're a burden to love you. Your children that have no idea what the real world is and the stuff you're trying to navigate through, they don't understand because they're children. But man, if you commit suicide, you're going to leave a huge, what I call these roots that branch out from a tree of trauma, and you're going to create some generational funk that you don't want to leave for your family.
It's that saying, I don't remember where it's from. Hurt people hurt people.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
For starters, you mentioned your account, right? Where's your account for everybody listening right now?
I have an account on Instagram, 3am fog, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I got there because a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, you work midnights too. It's crazy at 3 a.m. Like, yeah, close, but no.
Almost.
Yeah, 3am fog on Instagram. And I also, I'm uploading my channels to YouTube also, so I have it on YouTube. And so how I got to 3am fog. So when I was in that dysfunction of drinking, and this is just going to sound crazy, but spiritual warfare is absolutely real. I remember that I could have blacked out at 1 o'clock in the morning because of alcohol intake. And every day, that last year, every day at 3 in the morning, God would wake me up. And I would roll out of bed and there was a mirror right here. And I remember I would roll out of bed and I would look and I could barely see because I was so inebriated by the alcohol. And it was almost like God telling me, look at yourself in the mirror, man.
This isn't why I brought you here.
We've made it so far and look what you're doing. And so that stuck with me and I'm in the process of writing a book. And so fast forward, 3M Fog has been alive but dormant in me for a long time, right? So this past November, I had a good friend of mine that I lost who had problems with addiction. And again, I was a supervisor and he was struggling and I saw all the signs. And when I approached him, we ended up crying and hugging it out in the parking lot. And he's like, man, I had no idea. And I go, I know. And had I not seen you act like I just saw in the slurred speech, and I know, but guess what? There's help. Well, we lost him by whatever means necessary. He passed, right? So I went to his viewing, and I look over here, the SWAT team, and I look over here, the new RID guys, and I look over here, and as I'm driving through the parking lot looking, what caught my eye was there is no emotion. And this was a person that by all accounts, you'll never hear me call another man sweet. This guy was a very sweet,
guy.
Human being. Everybody loved this guy. Okay? And when I went in the viewing, the only person crying was his mother. And she told me, oh, you're JC? Yeah, he told me about you.
Oh, man. That hurts. Oh.
And I've lost several friends to overdose, right? And I get angry when I go to their viewings, So when I left the viewing, I said to myself, not another day. So I waited for the new year, January 3rd. I opened the LLC and I opened the account and sat there with a phone in my room and started talking to people. And it's taken off. There's a huge thirst to be well. There's nothing sadder than good men and women that serve and sit in front of you and ask you, will I ever be happy? And then you look at the flip side and you see the lack of leadership and the shitty leadership that don't care. And it's to the two extremes. People that care and they're suffering because they're out serving, and the people that are supposed to care about the ones serving that don't. And that's horrible. And so, the logo for me is 3 a.m. fog, and it's to feel again is my motto. People are like, what are you talking about? I said, what I'm talking about is when we go to calls and we handle these things, I don't want you to feel anything there. I want you to survive the battle and move through it. But when we get out of there and we retreat, we need to talk.
Yeah, feel it.
And you need to feel. Like I tell people all the time and they laugh. I go, hey man, I can cry like a little girl. I'll turn around and I'll beat your ass.
Yeah.
It doesn't change you.
Nope.
It doesn't make you less of a man. And through vulnerability, there is strength.
100%. 100%. That's where real strength comes from, right?
100%.
Because if you don't have the vulnerability, right, you don't have the depth. And if you don't have the depth, how are you supposed to be able to make the right decision?
Listen, I tell guys, you go to the gym, and if you know anything about working out, you've got to tear those muscles, and then you eat your protein, and it heals up, and that's how you grow that muscle. But you've got to tear it, and you've got to get sore and get that lactic acid and all that stuff. And being well is the same thing. We see the worst of humanity, but on the flip side, I tell people we also see the best. Okay, and we see what's real, and that's okay that we see that as long as we talk about it. We have to have debriefings, diffusions. We need to talk about it. The men and women need to feel comfortable with people that go, I had somebody recently in a very traumatic case down here that told me, the therapist did come out, but they didn't look at me in my eyes. Like they didn't care. It seemed like they didn't care, whatever. And I'm the first one. I may sit with somebody and they go, I don't like this guy, man. You have to find people that you feel comfortable. It's just like going to a doctor, a dentist, you have to feel comfortable, but you have to take that step and look for the help. And so, what I'm proposing, and we're going to have a new sheriff soon. What I'm proposing, when I was a shift commander, let's say there was a plane crash. There's a code for a plane crash, and you hit code 1. And everybody in the world that I'm supposed to call comes out. So what I'm asking for is the acknowledgement. Don't put it on the officer, because we're going to get I'm good, when I know you're not. Had you asked me when that 16-year-old girl committed suicide, I would have, I'm good. I know that you're not going to be good. And I went through most of my career not knowing, no knowledge at all, that those things were going to come back at me. There wasn't a block in the academy for defensive tactics, shooting, driving, and mental health. And now they are trying to change it and all that. But that has to be tackled with genuine care. It can't be like, hey, we're gonna get through this, and like if
it can't be like an SOP.
Yeah,
post,
you have defensive tactics, and we have all these guys that are like Bruce Lee's and Hoist Gracie and these guys, and we look for the Gracie brothers to do jujitsu and all, and then you just have, by the way, if you feel shitty, you see a dead baby. No, we have to really dive in there. The injuries are real. The injuries are absolutely real. So
how can people, besides following you on Instagram, right, and checking out YouTube, how can people, one, work with you, and how can other people that are watching then perhaps want to support some like?
Well, listen, like I said, I this is a grassroots. This is just like, I'm not going to stand by and see this, right? So I do have, and we were talking about this before, yesterday I kind of just barbecued and went in the pool and did nothing because I am meeting with a lot of officers that just feel comfortable, you know, and I love it because, you know, they feel comfortable, they open up, and, you know, for the last month and a half, I was working with somebody, and I said working, again, I'm not a therapist, don't want to claim to be one, I'm just somebody who's a peer and understands, right? So this individual was going through some stuff, and we, you know, after several days, almost a week, I said, listen, I think you need to go to detox. And we made some phone calls, I spoke to his spouse, I spoke to his parents, and we sent him to detox. And, you know, he recently got out. He's doing great. He's still in outpatient care. You know, when you speak to me, like, we'll talk about stuff and navigate through stuff. But, you know, the way a peer works, if we see a certain thing, we're like, hey, listen, you need to go talk to a professional. I have therapists. I have police psychologists that I talk to. I have people that I can send you to. This is like beyond me. Let's talk about it. Let's stir some emotion. Let's understand that you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. But you need to, you know.
It's the beginning. It's the
it's the very beginning. The path of healing, you know, starts when you acknowledge that, oh my God, I might have an issue, you know.
That's amazing. You know, I want to say the purpose of this podcast is to find people who are fearless and people who see a problem and are relentless in their approach in solving that problem. And I'm really happy that you're one of our guests today. And thank you so much for opening up.
Thank you
for talking about it.
Me.
Thank you for understanding that you're valuable. And going past that moment in your life with help, obviously.
Awesome.
And saying, you know, as God's creature, like, I have value, and look at all the value you're providing for your community. So
absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time here in Miami-Dade as a police officer, and thank you for providing support for police officers.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.